The discharge nurse had barely finished the sentence before my mother's expression cracked. She'd walked into the hospital the way she always walked into rooms, heels clicking, chin lifted, the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in a meaningful way. Her skin was bronze from 4 days in the Louisiana sun. Her nails were freshly done. She looked, impossibly, like she'd just returned from a vacation, because she had. She asked for my discharge paperwork at the front desk, and the nurse on duty, a quiet woman named Priya with dark eyes and a voice like still water, said she needed to confirm a few things first. Standard procedure, she explained. And then she slid the visitor log across the counter. My mother picked it up the way you pick up something you expect to be routine. Her thumb moved down the page. Then it stopped. I wasn't in the lobby. I was 3 floors up, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed for the first time without the room spinning. I didn't see her face go still. I didn't see the color leave it in stages the way Priya described to me later, first her forehead, then her cheeks, then the corners of her mouth, but I heard about it. And I tasted something I hadn't tasted in a long time. The truth has a flavor. It sits at the back of your throat like cold metal. Once you recognize it, you don't forget. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm an ER nurse at a hospital in Portland, Oregon, which means I spend my shifts managing chaos so calmly that people assume I was born without nerves. I wasn't. I just learned early that falling apart was a luxury I couldn't afford. In my family, my younger brother Jake was the dreamer. He was 26, handsome in the easy way that people forgive everything for, and endlessly, exhaustingly talented at cooking. My mother described his abilities the way sports parents describe prodigies. He has a gift, she'd say. Do you know how rare that is? And she'd look at me with a gaze that said the question was rhetorical, and also that I didn't have one. Jake was going to be a chef. Not just any chef, a celebrated one. The kind with a restaurant name above a door and a reservation list 3 months long. That was the dream. My mother believed in it with her whole heart. My father nodded along, and I paid for it, because that's what the responsible one does. It started the way it always starts, which is to say, it started small. A loan for Jake's culinary school application fees. A temporary help with rent when he moved to Portland to pursue it. Just this once for the knife set that cost more than my car payment. Every ask arrived wrapped in the same packaging. This is important for Jake's future. You have a steady job. You understand how much this means to him. We knew you'd come through. I did come through. Over and over. For nearly 4 years. I calculated it once on a slow night at the hospital, sitting in the break room at 2 a.m. with cold coffee and a phone calculator. The number I landed on was somewhere just past $68,000. And that was before I counted the groceries I'd bought for their house when my father's hours got cut, before I counted the car repair that was just until next month, before I counted the plane ticket to New York for Jake's first big competition, the one that didn't go anywhere but cost me 12 days of savings. My father wasn't cruel about it. He was something quieter than cruel. He had this way of going silent when I hesitated, a pause that filled up with expectation and disappointment until the air in the room felt too heavy to breathe. I could feel his judgment like weather. You do what you can for family, he'd say, and the unspoken half of the sentence always landed clean. Or you prove that you don't care. So I did what I could. I picked up extra shifts. I skipped the vacation I'd been saving for. I ate lunch at the hospital so I didn't have to think about grocery budgets. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that next year things would stabilize, that Jake would find his footing, that my parents would stop needing me to be the floor beneath them. I was still telling myself that the night I collapsed, it was the end of a run of 4 12-hour shifts in 5 days. The ER had been relentless, a multi-car accident on the I-84, 2 overdoses, a pediatric code that followed me home in my sleep for weeks afterward. I'd been ignoring the pain in my lower right side for nearly 2 days because I didn't have time for it and because I was an ER nurse who was very good at rationalizing symptoms away. It was probably muscle strain. It was probably stress. It was probably nothing. It was my appendix. It had been nothing until it was very much something, and by the time I finally sat down on a bench outside the break room and admitted to myself that the pain was no longer a maybe, I had maybe 30 minutes before it became a crisis. I made it to the nurse's station. I said 3 words to my colleague. Janelle, she knows the story. and Janelle took one look at my face and called the attending physician before I finished the sentence. I remember being wheeled down a corridor I'd walked 100 times from the other direction. I remember the ceiling lights strobing past overhead. I remember thinking, in a strangely detached way, that I should call my mother. I didn't get the chance. When I woke up, the room was the particular white of a recovery ward, not the harsh fluorescent of the ER, but a softer, more forgiving light that still managed to feel impersonal. My mouth was dry. My abdomen felt like someone had rearranged its contents. A monitor beeped beside me with mechanical regularity, and for a long moment I just listened to it, because it was steady, and I needed steady. Then I turned my head. The chair beside the bed was empty. Not just empty, bare. No jacket draped over the arm. No bag on the floor. No half-drunk coffee cup on the side table. No indication that anyone had ever sat there and waited for me to open my eyes. There was a plastic pitcher of water and a call button on a cord, and nothing else. My nurse that shift was a man named Owen, tall and deliberate in his movements the way experienced nurses learn to be. He checked my chart before he looked at me, which I recognized as a professional habit and also, in that moment, as something I was grateful for. It gave me time to arrange my face. I asked about my family with the tone I use when I'm asking about a patient's prognosis, and I already suspect the answer. Owen paused. He had a good pause, neutral, non-committal, the pause of someone who has delivered difficult information many times and knows that the delivery matters. They came by, he said. How long? He looked at the chart instead of at me. A little over half an hour. I didn't say anything right away. Half an hour. I'd been in surgery. They'd been here for half an hour. They had a flight, Owen said, as if this explained it. As if flights were natural disasters, unstoppable and blameless. Where? New Orleans. Of course. Jake's culinary showcase. The regional competition that my mother had been talking about for 3 months like it was a coronation. This could change everything for him, she'd said. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. She'd said it so many times the words had stopped meaning anything, but the implication had always stayed sharp. Don't make this about you. Don't be the reason we miss this. I was in surgery, and they caught their flight. I closed my eyes. Not because I wanted to cry. I didn't. Not yet, but because I needed a moment to let the information settle. There is a specific quality to the pain of being unsurprised. It doesn't hit like a shock. It settles in, heavy and slow, like something you already knew but kept hoping wasn't true. Did they ask about me? I said to the ceiling. Owen was quiet for a beat too long. Your mother asked when you'd be cleared to drive. Your father asked if the surgery was covered under your insurance. He paused. Your brother sent a text from the airport. I waited. It said good luck. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. My phone came back to me the next afternoon, once I was lucid enough to be trusted with it. There were messages my mother saying, call me. My father asking about my follow-up appointment in a way that was really asking whether this inconvenience had an end date. And Jake's text, exactly as Owen had described. Good luck with the surgery. A period at the end, not a question mark. Because Jake did not require a response. I put the phone face down on the bed and didn't touch it for the rest of the day. It was on my second night, unable to sleep, listening to the hospital breathe around me, that Owen stopped by on his rounds and lingered at the door in a way that was slightly longer than routine. I asked if something was wrong. He looked at his clipboard, then at me. You've had a visitor, he said. Every night, actually. Since the night of your surgery. I thought he meant one of my coworkers. I had friends in this building. People who knew me here. His name isn't on the staff list, Owen said. I frowned. Who is it? He's been waiting in the hallway. He doesn't come in. Owen's voice was careful. He stays. That night, I asked Owen to describe him. Older, he said. Maybe mid-50s. Quiet. Polite to the staff. He always arrived after visiting hours, and Owen had let it go because the man had never caused any trouble, and there was something about him, Owen struggled to describe it, something that made you feel like he belonged there. He doesn't have any flowers, Owen added. He doesn't bring anything. He just sits in the chair outside your room. I lay in the dark after Owen left and stared at the closed door and tried to think of who it might be. I came up blank. I went through faces, colleagues, former neighbors, my mother's friends, and none of them fit the description. A man my parents' age, sitting in a hospital hallway every night, not coming in, not announcing himself. The next morning, I asked Owen for his name. Owen's expression did something complicated. He checked the visitor log without being asked, and read the name out flat and neutral. Robert Hale. The name dropped into my chest like a stone into still water. My mother had said that name exactly twice in my entire life that I could remember. Once, when I was 12 and found an old photograph in a box I wasn't supposed to open, a man I didn't recognize, standing in front of a house I'd never seen, looking directly at the camera with light eyes that were, I'd thought at the time, a little bit like mine. I'd asked who he was. My mother had taken the photograph from my hands and said the name like it was a door she was closing. Robert Hale, nobody important. And the second time, years later, when I'd asked why I didn't look like anyone else in the family, I had my mother's dark hair but something else in the structure of my face. The jaw, the eyes, and she'd said, "Some people just skip a generation," and changed the subject so hard, I felt the whiplash. Robert Hale. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the recovery ward and listened to the hallway and thought about that photograph and my mother's voice when she said nobody important, and the way she'd taken it from my hands like she was afraid of what I'd see in. To stat. In the morning, I asked Owen if the man was there. Owen said yes. He'd arrived around 9 the night before and left just after midnight. He'd be back. "Can you tell him I'd like to see him?" I said. Owen looked at me steadily. "You sure?" I said I was sure. He came in that evening just as the light outside the window was going orange. He knocked on the open door, which surprised me. Most people just walked in. He was taller than I'd expected, broad in the way of men who worked with their hands when they were younger. His hair was gray at the temples, dark everywhere else. His eyes, when he stepped into the light, were light green. I knew them immediately because I had seen them in mirrors my entire life and never understood where they came from. He stopped inside the doorway and didn't come closer, which I understood later was intentional. He was giving me room. I looked at him for a long time. "You've been here every night," I said. He nodded. "Why?" His jaw moved before the words did. "Because I didn't want you to be alone," he said. His voice was low, careful, like he was picking each word up and checking it before he put it down. "You don't know me," I said. He met my eyes. "That's not entirely true." My heart was doing something irregular that had nothing to do with the surgery. I asked him who he was, even though I already knew some version of the answer. I needed to hear it said. He looked down at his hands. Then he looked back at me. He said, "I'm your father." The monitor beside me beeped steadily on. The room was very quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I sat with those 3 words in the particular silence of a hospital room and let them rearrange everything slowly, the way a tide rearranges the shore, not violently, not all at once, but completely, and in a way that doesn't go back. He didn't push. He stood near the door and let me think. That patience, I would come to learn, was characteristic of him. He'd had a long time to practice waiting. He'd known about me, he said, carefully, answering the questions he could see forming on my face. He had known since before I was born. There had been a relationship with my mother, brief, complicated, and that was a story for another time if I wanted it. She had ended it before she knew she was pregnant. By the time he found out, which was years later, through people who knew people, I was in elementary school, and my mother had made it very clear that she had no interest in revisiting history. He hadn't pushed. He told himself it wasn't his place. He'd watched from a distance in the ways that people can now, at a remove that felt like the responsible choice and felt, he admitted, like cowardice when he looked back at it. When he heard about my surgery, a former colleague of mine who'd worked at his company, a small overlap of worlds, something had shifted. He hadn't planned to come in. He hadn't known if he was allowed, but he'd come and stood outside the glass and stayed, because standing outside felt like at least something, and something was better than the nothing he'd managed for 30 years. He paid for my hospitalization, he told me quietly. He'd spoken to billing anonymously, but he wanted me to know. I stared at him. My family was in New Orleans, and this man, this stranger, this person whose name my mother said like a door she was closing, had sat in a hallway chair every night and quietly handled the bills they'd never asked about. When you've spent years buying love from people who take it for granted, you recognize the real thing by how foreign it feels. Real love is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up and stays. My mother returned on day 4. I heard her before I saw her, the particular frequency of her voice in a hallway, bright and certain and slightly louder than it needed to be. She was speaking to someone at the nurse's station about discharge procedures. She used the word finally in a way that landed at the end of the sentence like a gavel. Priya, who had seen everything and maintained the professional serenity of someone who has learned that families are complicated and hospitals have forms, handed her the visitor log. I heard later, from Priya, about what happened next. The way my mother's thumb slowed on the page. The way she turned it sideways as if the orientation might change what she was reading. The way the color went out of her face in stages and left something else behind, not grief, not guilt, but the specific look of someone whose carefully maintained story has just developed a crack they can't immediately repair. She came upstairs. She walked into my room the way she'd walked into the lobby, composed, purposeful, skin warm from Louisiana sun. She was wearing a new linen blouse. She'd had a good trip. You could see it in the looseness of her shoulders, the way she looked rested. She looked at me. She looked at Robert, who was sitting in the chair beside my bed, unhurried, and her composure did something complicated and swift across her face before she reassembled it. "What is going on?" she said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as a question, which was her preferred syntax. I said, "Hello, Mom." She looked at Robert the way you look at something that shouldn't be in a place it has no business being. "What are you doing here?" she said to him. Robert's voice was even. "Visiting my daughter." The phrase landed in the room and stayed there. My mother turned to me. And behind the composure, I could see the calculation happening. How to reframe this, how to reclaim the narrative, how to walk back the crack before it widened. "Don't listen to him," she said. This is not what he's making it sound like." I kept my voice quiet and level. "Why did your face go pale when you saw his name in the log?" Her mouth opened. Closed. The tan didn't help her. Pale is pale. My father arrived a few minutes later, trailing her the way he always had, arriving after the situation was already in motion and adding his weight to it. He looked at me. Not at the monitors, not at the bruising on my arm from the IV. His expression was the same one he wore when a bill came in higher than expected. Slightly put out, slightly inconvenienced. "What did you do?" he said to me. I let that land. "Hello," I said. He looked at Robert, his jaw set. "This is family business." Robert didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I have a question," I said, and my mother and father both turned to me. I kept my voice in the tone I use in the ER, not loud, not aggressive, just completely clear. "I was in surgery. My appendix ruptured. Owen tells me you were here for about 30 minutes. He looked at my father. "You asked about insurance coverage." I looked at my mother, asked about when I'd be cleared to drive. My mother's voice went tight. "Jake had a competition. You knew about the competition. You know how important—" "This is the third one," I said. "I know how important they all are. You've told me." At length, her eyes sharpened. "We got here as fast as we could when we got back." "You got here as fast as you could when the showcase was over," I said. She waved a hand. "You were stable. The surgery went well. There was nothing we could do. There it was. Stable. The word they used to describe me in every situation. Claire is stable. Claire will manage. Claire has a good job and a steady head, and she doesn't need us the way Jake does. Stable, as if I were infrastructure. Stable, as if that were a destination and not just a word for fine enough to ignore. "I paid your mortgage for 8 months last year," I said. My mother's expression flickered. "That was a loan." "It was not a loan," I said. "We both know that. No paperwork, no timeline, no payment back. Neither the first time nor the 4 times after." I went to my phone on the side table and pulled up a note I'd made 2 nights ago during one of the long white hours when the hospital was quiet and I had nothing to do but think clearly. "Over 4 years," I said. "I've given this family approximately $68,000. I said it slowly, in the voice you use for numbers that matter. Culinary school deposits, Jake's knife equipment, moving costs, rent support, the car, Dad's out-of-pocket medical. Mom's trip to see Jake's first competition in San Francisco. That was $2,800 for flights and hotels, if anyone was counting. No one had been counting. That was always the point. My father's face had gone red in a way that wasn't embarrassment. How dare you keep a ledger on your family? I keep a ledger on my patients, I said. It's part of the job. I make sure nothing gets missed. My mother stepped forward. Her voice dropped into the register she used when she wanted to punish without leaving marks. You are being dramatic. You just had surgery and you're emotional and you're taking this out on us instead of being grateful that we're here now. I waited until she was done. Then I said, he, and I nodded at Robert, has been here every night. He sat in the hallway for 4 nights, and he didn't come in until I asked him to, and he paid my hospital bill before I knew his name. And you? I looked at my mother. Haven't asked about my pain levels once since you walked in. Her chin lifted. He manipulated you. He showed up when you were vulnerable and told you some story, and you're letting him use this against me. Robert's voice was quiet, but it carried. I'm not using anything. I spent 30 years not being here. That's not something I'm proud of. But I'm here now. My mother's eyes went sharp and old. You don't get to walk back in and rewrite history. I know what I missed, he said. I'm not trying to rewrite it. I'm just trying to make sure she's not alone. The word alone echoed in the room. My mother heard it. I could tell. Because she moved to fill the space it created, the way she always did, with volume, with motion, with forward momentum. You're coming home when they discharge you, she said to me. I've already spoken to the doctor about the timeline. Your father can stay at your apartment until you're back on your feet, help you get around. I looked at her. No, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? No, I said again. My voice was very calm. I changed my emergency contact on file here 6 weeks ago after Dad's medical situation, when I realized I needed someone who was actually available. You're no longer listed for my medical decisions. The hospital can confirm that. You didn't. You can't. I can, I said. I did. It was straightforward. My mother looked at me the way she looked at things that had stopped working in ways she'd counted on. The calculation was visible, how to get back control, who to appeal to, which lever to pull. She chose guilt. She always chose guilt because it had always worked before. Think about what you're doing, she said, voice softening into something textured and sad. We're your family. Jake loves you. Your father loves you. We've been going through a hard time. All of us, and you're choosing a stranger over us. I thought about what I was doing. I thought about the $68,000. I thought about the empty chair on the night I woke up from surgery. I thought about Robert Hale sitting in a hallway for 4 nights because showing up felt like the least he could do. I thought about Jake's text from the airport. Good luck. I picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. I turned the screen toward my mother without speaking. She saw the screen, and her expression changed. I've stopped the automatic transfer, I said. The account you had access to is closed. I did it the day before yesterday. Her voice went sharp. You can't, the contractor, the back payment on. Call Jake's sponsor, I said. I hear those showcases have great networking opportunities. My father stepped forward, voice cold and flat. You will regret this. I've been regretting the last 4 years, I said. I'm trying to stop. My mother looked at Robert one last time, with the expression of someone who knows they've lost the room, but isn't ready to say it. You told her to do this, she said to him. You came in here and you turned her against her own family. Robert met her eyes, and he didn't look angry. He looked tired and honest and a little bit sad. I sat in the hallway, he said quietly. She made her own decisions. My mother stood there for a moment in the particular silence of someone who expected a different ending and hasn't finished processing that the story has moved on without them. Then she turned. She walked to the door with her shoulders set, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She didn't look back. My father followed her. He paused in the doorway and looked at me with the expression he usually reserved for disappointing news and unpaid invoices. Then he left. The door swung closed. The room felt lighter immediately. Not empty lighter. The difference between a held breath and a released one. Priya appeared a few minutes later, quiet and efficient. adjusting something on my IV line that probably didn't need adjusting. "You okay?" she asked, which was a clinical question and also wasn't. "I feel like I might shake apart," I admitted. "That's the adrenaline," she said. "It'll pass." She smoothed my blanket with the particular gentleness of someone who has done this for strangers 1,000 times and means it every time. Then she slipped out. Robert was still in the chair beside me. He hadn't moved during any of it. He'd stayed in the way I was beginning to understand was simply his nature, not taking up space, not inserting himself, but present. Reliably, stubbornly present. "Does she hate you?" I asked him, because the question had been sitting in me and I was tired of sitting on it. He was quiet for a moment. "She's afraid of what I represent," he said. "I think that's different from hate, though maybe not different enough." I looked at the ceiling. "She never told me." "No, I should be angry about that." "You are angry about that," he said gently. "It's okay that you are." The thing was, I wasn't sure what I felt. It was too large and too new, this information. Like a room I'd just walked into, that was bigger than the hallway had suggested. I would need time to understand the dimensions of it. I would need time to understand the dimensions of a lot of things. But he was here. That was a fact. He was in the chair beside my bed, and he had been outside the glass door for 4 nights, and he had paid the bill before he knew if I'd ever want to see him. Because some things you do not because they will be recognized, but because they are the right thing, and you've run out of excuses not to. When they discharged me on my timeline, which was 4 days later than my mother had requested through channels she no longer had access to, I came home to my apartment and stood in the middle of my living room and let the silence of it settle around me. My phone had voicemails. I listened to my mother's first, because I'm thorough by training, and then I set it down. The weeks that followed were the strangest quiet I'd known. The absence of financial dread, of the low-grade anticipation of the next ask, felt unfamiliar. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops not with relief at first, but with the disorientation of a space that's been cleared out. Robert called every few days. Not every day he was careful, calibrated, aware that trust is not something you demand on a schedule. We talked for short stretches at first. About small things. He asked about nursing. Genuinely curious. He told me he'd worked in construction management for most of his career. Worked with his hands before that. Still did, when he could. He had a daughter from a later relationship. He said, I had a half-sister, 24 years old, living in Bend. He told me this carefully, watching for my reaction even through a phone line. He didn't push it. He said whatever I wanted from this, that was the pace. It was the right thing to say. It was the kind of thing you say when you've thought about someone else's experience more than your own, which was, I was realizing, not something I'd encountered very often from the people who were supposed to love me. I called Janelle the week after discharge. She'd been the one to call the attending the night I collapsed, the one who'd held the phone for me in those blurry minutes between standing and not standing, and she answered on the second ring and said, So, are you actually going to rest this time? Or are we doing this again in 6 months? I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. It came out wrong too long, a little unsteady, but it was real. I'm resting, I told her. Good, she said. You scared the hell out of all of us. My mother texted once a week for the first month. The texts started as practical questions about the joint account, the contractor's invoice. A bill, she said, had my name on it, and slowly shifted into something more personal as the practical ones went unanswered. She said I was making a mistake. She said I would understand when I was older what it meant to sacrifice for your children. She said Jake was devastated. She said my father missed me. She said a lot of things that were designed to open a door I had carefully, deliberately, and with a great deal of clarity of purpose, closed. I didn't respond to those either. Not out of cruelty. Out of self-preservation, which I was learning, slowly, are not always the same thing. Jake texted once. It said I heard what you did and I think it's messed up, honestly. There was no question mark because Jake, like his competition text, did not require a response. I thought about the $68,000. I thought about culinary school fees and knife sets and plane tickets to showcases where I was never in the audience. I thought about the summer I'd wanted to visit a friend in Denver and couldn't afford the flight because I'd been helping Jake make rent. I put the phone down. I went for a walk. That was my response. On a Saturday in late October, 6 weeks after discharge, I drove out to the coast. I do this sometimes when I need the particular perspective that large water provides. The Pacific has a way of making human problems feel accurately sized, not small, not dismissible, but proportionate. There's a difference. I sat on a piece of driftwood and watched the waves come in. The air was cold and tasted like salt. My abdomen still ached in the specific deep tissue way of a healing scar, and I was grateful for it. Oddly, pain is information. Pain says, here is the place that was damaged. Here is where the work of repair is happening. My phone stayed in my pocket. I thought about Priya handing my mother the visitor log. I thought about the color leaving her face in stages. I thought about my mother's voice when she said, Robert Hale is nobody. Said it the way you say things you're afraid of. Fast and quiet and too firmly. The way you close a door on a room you don't want anyone to see into. I thought about a man spending his nights in a hospital hallway chair, not knowing if he'd ever be invited in. Just refusing to let someone be alone in the dark. Here is what I've learned about love. And I learned it the hard way, which is maybe the only way it sticks. Love doesn't keep an invoice. Love doesn't call from the airport to say good luck while you're in surgery. Love doesn't calculate whether you're stable enough that they can make their flight. Real love sits in hallways. Real love picks up the phone at 3 a.m. when you have a question about discharge instructions and you're afraid you're asking too much. Real love shows up before it knows if it will be allowed in. I had spent 4 years paying into a version of family that ran like a subscription service. Ongoing, automatic, non-negotiable, with no way to cancel without guilt. I had been the utility, the backup generator, the one who held things together so the people with potential could afford to be reckless with theirs. I wasn't that anymore. I was still figuring out what I was instead. The waves folded and came back. The wind picked up and then settled. A pelican flew low over the water with that prehistoric patience they have, unbothered, reading the surface for what it needed. I took out my phone eventually. Not to check messages. I texted Robert. Just one line. Free this weekend if you want to get coffee, I said. 3 dots appeared. Then his answer. I'd like that, he wrote. Very much. I put the phone back in my pocket and looked at the ocean. The afternoon light was doing something extraordinary to the surface of it, gold and gray and green all at once, restless and vast and entirely indifferent to the particular arrangements of any single human life. I breathed in. I breathed out. Somewhere behind me, a family was calling a child back from the waterline. Her voice carried above the wind high, laughing, not yet ready to come back, and the parent's voice, beneath it, patient and constant. I've got you. I see you. I'm right here. I'd been waiting my whole life to know how that felt. I was starting to find out.